Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us and allowing me to talk with you regarding some of the challenges that we are faced with when working in Africa, a place that is very near and dear to my heart. I have no disclosures. When we talk about the history of Africa, the history is very, very rich. It is no stranger to colonialization, and you can still see the remnants of colonialization as you travel throughout the continent, whether it's street signs or restaurants or even language in some cases. One of the major daunting things about the continent is its just massive size. So that definitely presents its own challenges when you think about traveling, not only within the continent itself, but getting to Africa. It's not like you can do a weekend getaway to Africa. It takes certainly a significant amount of time to get there. And then if you're going to travel throughout or provide your services throughout, there's definitely challenges. And you can see here, I mean, you could put all of the United States and China and several other countries just to just look at the massive size of the continent. When the average person thinks of Africa, we think of safari and we think of the natural resources and its natural beauty, and all of that is definitely one of the attractions to the continent. But along with that, of course, you have to think of disease and the everyday life of the common people there on the ground. So whether it's malaria or Ebola or HIV or COVID or what have you, you definitely have to look at the impact of disease in all of the countries. Unfortunately, many of the countries are not strangers to war and conflict. And the downside, of course, is the effect that it has on the nation's economy, as well as the infrastructure, of course, the delivery of care, medical and surgical, and all kinds of health care throughout the different nations. So war and conflict is very, very common, unfortunately, in many of the countries in sub-Saharan Africa. And then, of course, you have to discuss poverty, which affects most of the continent. And with poverty, of course, comes famine and drought. And with that, of course, comes diseases and a whole spectrum that follows that. The good news is that when we look at poverty and how we are attacking it across the globe, sub-Saharan Africa is making some progress, certainly not as dramatic as maybe East Asia and Pacific and certainly South Asia. But the good news to report is that at least there is some progress there with regards to poverty. And in looking at this chart here, we can see that several countries are looking to end poverty by 2030 or somewhere in and around that time frame. So there's definitely progress there. And when you look recently, you can see a tremendous inflow of money and investments from places like Russia and China, giving people opportunity to work, increasing the workforce, and with that, of course, hopefully increasing health care and patients' access to health care. So we're going to talk about some of the challenges. And the first challenge, of course, we're going to talk about is the infrastructure. This is an example of a room, an operating room that I worked in one of the remote villages of Ethiopia. As you can see, it's very bare bones. Most of the stuff, if not all of it, was contributed and donated from Western countries. And like I said, there's not anything particularly special about it. And you could even see your curtains there. So again, not your typical operating room, but again, we do whatever it is that we have to do and make do with whatever we have there. A very, very common phenomenon for any of us who have traveled to Africa is, of course, loss of electricity. It is very, very common to have electricity cut off several times throughout the day, throughout the evening, and it's just a way of life. It's just what they're used to. You could be in the middle of eating a meal and the electricity cuts off and you just keep going on. It's not a big deal. You could be in the middle of an operation, the electricity cuts off, and what do? You rely on your residents and your co-surgeons to turn on their iPhones. It's amazing how in the middle of poverty and lack of resources, most people still have a way to get some sort of mobile phone, and they'll just turn on their flashlights and you can still continue to operate even though there's no electricity. It's very, very difficult to maintain sterility of your instruments. This is our These are our sterile instruments. Very, very difficult when you don't have an autoclave and you don't have electricity. So again, it's all hit or miss. You may come and try to do, knock out several operations that day, but if you don't have consistent electricity, it's just not going to happen. You may be lucky if you're lucky enough to have a room that has curtains and windows that can let in some sunlight. So if the electricity, actually when the electricity cuts off, all you have to do is ask a nurse to just open the curtain and let some of the natural daylight sun in. At least you can get something done. In the evening, of course, you're out of luck. The other thing is, of course, water. Especially with global warming and temperatures rising, drought is a very, very, very big problem within sub-Saharan Africa, really all of Africa and around the world in general. And water, of course, is just a big, big problem. For those of you who have been to Africa, one of the staples of African society is the jerry can. It is very common to have children, as you see here, and women go fetch water in jerry cans and kind of keep them stored for when the water cuts off, which is very frequently. This is an example in Nigeria of our scrub sink. Of course, there's no water there, but have no fear. The man in the kitchen down the hall, he's got his jerry cans and they're filled with water. So you can ask him to come to the operating room after he's cooked lunch, and he can pour water over your hands so that you could at least wash your hands with water before you go to the operating room. Mind you, there's no soap or there's no, bars to scrub with, but that's the only source of water that sometimes you can have. So you make do with whatever you got. Second challenge is not uncommon to the developing world, and that is brain drain. Just like all of us, we want better opportunities. We want to be trained and educated in the best way that we can. It is not uncommon for young Africans to travel abroad and get their education. Some of them may be good enough to come back. Others, most of them actually will stay abroad and look for opportunities to advance, give themselves a nice lifestyle and certainly a higher standard of living for themselves and their families. So what does one do? I have a friend of mine who's a plastic surgeon and was very active with Operation Smile. Literally went to the same hospital, same country, year after year after year for over 20 some odd years, had a very, very motivated and interested nurse that wanted to help. And so he essentially trained her, and she got to the point where she was so good, she knew, yes, this is something that I can handle. I've done this before and we're good. No, this may be fraught with complications that I cannot handle. This is way beyond my scope. So she was actually trained and very, very comfortable to allow that sustainability when he was not there. And the main thing, of course, is, like Ray talked about, just to have some sort of sustainability when the foreign doctors are not there. Navigation. We talk about New York City traffic and Los Angeles traffic and Houston traffic and the main traffic problems around the United States. We need ambulances. Ambulances are certainly present throughout Africa. Now, how do you expect them to get through this in a timely fashion to deliver patients to the nearest hospital or the nearest medical center of any kind so that they can provide, they could reach adequate quick care? So here we can bypass that by helicopters and so forth, but there, unfortunately, that is a very, very big problem. So navigation is very, very true. This is very, very common in the major cities throughout the continent. And the last challenge I'll talk about is just cultural beliefs. It is not uncommon for you to have people, specifically whether they're, they have tribal beliefs or their own beliefs, spiritual beliefs, who think that they don't need modern medicine, and they can refer to a local medicine man or some sort of priest or someone in their village that can help them instead of using medicine, instead of using surgery and so forth. This is a young woman in Nigeria who decided to use coins to burn quarters, or whatever the equivalent of quarters was in Nigeria, and see if that would help remove the toxins and poisons from her system. Cupping is another practice that is commonly used as well to kind of remove disease or any evil spirits from within the patients. This is again, a priest or like your local medicine man who you can go to, and he'll concoct some sort of something, syrup or something for you to drink or something for you to eat, with the belief that, of course, you will be cured of all of this. And these people are not very different from a lot of Americans who don't believe in vaccines, right? Here are people, they just want to go to this guy and they believe, well, he's been around forever. This practice has been around forever, and it works. So if I rub these two sticks together or drink this magic potion or whatever, I should feel a lot better. Sadly, some of those cultural beliefs tend to be a little bit more harsh and traumatic. It is common, actually, and a phenomenon now currently within Eastern Africa, where our albinos are sought. They're actually preyed upon because they think if you can take bones or the blood of an albino, they have some sort of, they possess some sort of spiritual powers or magic or some sort that could help patients and heal them of their illnesses. So it's very, very difficult for the albino population, whether it's in Tanzania or just any parts of Eastern Africa. They actually have to live in hiding. You can see on the picture on the right there, that young man actually had a limb chopped off. And he was lucky that he survived. A lot of times they'll be beheaded or they'll have other parts of their bodies chopped off and given to patients thinking that they have, again, some sort of magic spiritual healing powers. And so it's very, very difficult. Governments are trying to, fix this. But again, they have their beliefs. They're stuck in their own ways. Hopefully one day it will change. But then again, despite all of it, the wealth of Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, does come within its people. And when I say wealth, I'm not talking about monetary wealth. It's very common to operate there and go, round on your patients the next morning only to find, 20 family members there that'll bring them food, that'll bring them blankets, that'll bring them water. And that is where their wealth lies. There's definitely a sense of family, definitely a sense of unity. And that is what provides, I guess, the most important care overall. It's not a financial thing, it's not a medicinal or surgical thing, but is definitely the wealth of the people. Through all of their obstacles and through all of the disease and challenges, they find a way to smile, they find a way to get through their days and to make the most of what life has given them. And that definitely is the wealth that I certainly appreciate every time I go there. And just getting to talk to them and see just how wonderful they are and how they always manage to find and see the cup half full. And that was it. Brief, but thank you. I'm open to any questions.